Welcome to Mash the Gas Podcast. Mash the Gas Podcast. Your weekly breakdown of every NASCAR Cup Series race. Here are your hosts, Kevin Batstone and Jeff Davis.
Welcome back, race fans, to another episode of Mash the Gas Podcast. I'm Jeff Davis. Joining me shortly is Mr. Kevin Batstone. We are here to cover the YellaWood 500 from Talladega Speedway out there in Alabama, Kevin. And who mashed the gas this weekend?
Well, you know, it's typical Talladega chaos, Jeff, as we knew it would be going into this playoff race. Of course, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., man, gets it done. Old Ricky Stenhouse leads 19 laps. Barely has a nose over the 6 of Keselowski, making it the third closest finish of the year at .006 one thousandths of a second. Classic Dega finish, man.
Yeah, it really was, Kevin. And, Ricky Stenhouse, whatever we like to call him, hey, he wins a race one every 3.5 years approximately. I took his 4 wins, divided it by his 14 years in the Cup Series. He's got 2 lucky races out of Dega. And, good for Ricky Stenhouse, Kevin.
Yeah, good for him and good for that team. You know, I know with Kroger kind of pulling out and them losing some sponsors going into the offseason, old Doherty on top of that crew. You know, I mean, we know it's been an underfunded team for a while, really not a championship caliber team. And like you just mentioned, Ricky, you know, his career has been pretty sporadic, you know, definitely known as a super speedway type racer. I mean, Jeff, every time we run Dega, I put Ricky in my garage. And for some reason this week, it just slipped my mind. And so with 5 to go, I saw the 47 up there and I thought, you know what? The one time I don't put him in, he's going to go win this race.
I actually had old Brad Keselowski sitting in my garage too at the end of stage 2, and look what happens. So this is just one of those races, Kevin. I really do not like this race in the playoffs. I think we should only go to Dega once a year. That's just my opinion. I don't want to see any super speedways. It's too much of just a roll of the dice. I mean, we saw a lot of guys up and coming back, forth the whole time. You know, it's like we were talking just a minute ago off air about the lead changes. We had 66 different lead changes, 24 drivers that actually led a lap. But it's just too much of a gamble to have in the playoffs, Kevin. And that's just my opinion.
Well, you know, and Dega, of course, has always sold tickets. We see the infield on Saturday night. So as far as it being a marketing revenue machine for NASCAR, it certainly is. But that's coming at a price now, I think, as the years have gone on. I've never really been a big fan of super speedway racing. I've been pretty vocal that over the years. You know, Daytona 500 has a place in the sport, and, you know, Talladega has a place in the sport. But it's just, you know, every time we go there, these wrecks get bigger and bigger. You know, I mean, for the most part, 188 laps around this racetrack, I think, is just too many to begin with. You know, I'm not saying we necessarily need to take it to a 400, but Jeff, every time we come here, it's 2 stages of riding around, follow the leader, try to stay in line, and then go for it with 10 to go and hope you don't get in the big one. I mean, it's textbook predictable.
Yeah, and it got ridiculous. I mean, I actually enjoyed the majority of the race. I mean, I felt like I was like at an Indiana Jones movie, you know, all the action going on. The first stage, we saw a ton of 4-wide driving. It was awesome. Couldn't really get very much if you're in the back there. You kind of just had to fall in line, and then the second stage, we a lot of non-4-pack or 4 side by side, got to a little bit of a single line here and there. And then we got into the third stage and we were back to 4 wide almost the entire time. We watched this whole movie of Indiana Jones, and then right at the very end, it just cuts off, and goes and plays like Gone with the Wind. And I was just like, what the hell? I got so pissed off last night, Kevin, watching this race. I actually turned off the TV when that wreck happened on lap 5. I just couldn't stand it.
Well, and it took about 37 minutes from the time of caution to get back to going into green, which ultimately ended up being NASCAR overtime. So, of course, for some of the broadcasting positions on that, they end up going over on their time, which led for no post-race. Just typical mess cleanup. I mean, it was really bad though, Jeff. 28 cars involved in this mess, and a lot of them were just stuck in the grass. The 42 was doing burnouts down there, throwing debris everywhere. Some guys were trying to get a push. Some didn't want to get towed. They were telling Chase Briscoe on the radio, hey, don't get out of the car if they try to get you to come out. I mean, just a complete disaster. And once again, Josh Berry, gets thrown in the DVP, not even an option. They just took him straight back to the garage. Some guys got a tow back to pit road. There was just a complete mess. I thought NASCAR did a piss poor job of handling that situation.
It really did. And I think that's where I started getting frustrated. I just saw so many cars in there and I'm wondering, okay, yeah, who's going to get the DVP here? Who's going to get towed back? Who's going to be able to race? I just got really frustrated at it. Not just because of, the fantasy league stuff that we all do and have fun with. But it's just not conducive for playoff racing. And another thing you and I were talking about over the weekend was practice. Why is there not practice at a playoff race? I don't care if it's super speedway or, cookie cutter, whatever. Give him the practice. Look at old Daniel Suarez had unimproved adjustments on a hood flap. And not only did he have to start at the back of the line, they made him do a drive-through penalty, Kevin.
Yeah, and that's pretty much going to kill your day. Obviously at a track like Dega, you're not going to lose the amount of laps you would at, say, a Bristol or other places. But just the ruling on that is again a result of no practice. And of course, Suarez ends up finishing 26th on the day. Got involved in some of the mess. Got shuffled back there. When the field came around and ended up turning across the nose of the 78 of BJ McLeod. So yeah, just a lot of mess all around. I think bottom line, like you mentioned, if we're in the playoffs, we need to have practice and qualifying every single week. Obviously there's rainouts and there's situations that prohibit that from happening. But the fact that they even have a happy hour just for these guys to go out, test their setups out, it's ridiculous. We have to be practicing in the playoffs. It just doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't. So to see, 28 cars being involved in that accident just blows my mind. That's a lot of money. I mean, not everyone was totally wrecked, obviously. It's like, a lot of it was just flat tires and a little fender bender here or there, nothing major. But, that's a lot of dollars coming out of these owners' pockets. So, I felt bad a little bit for some of these drivers. Like I said, Daniel Suarez having that unfortunate with the penalties, but he's still sitting two below the cutoff line. I guess it didn't hurt him that bad. He lost 4 points, so he's 20 in the negative from the cutoff line, and he came into it at 14 points below. But pretty interesting to see Joey Logano now below the cutoff line, and I think he was pretty damn frustrated after what all ensued.
Well, it's, typical Dega. You just don't know if you're going to end up on the hook or if you're going to make it through the other side. And for the 22, he got collected in the mess. Now 13 to the negative. I mean, not necessarily a must win at the Roval, but you have to kind of approach it that way with how these playoffs work. And, it's just unfortunate that, that's just this style of racing. That's how the round of 12 works, and we might go through this entire round without even seeing a playoff driver win. There's AJ Allmendinger won this race a year ago. You got Shane Van Gisbergen, and, you got guys that can go out and win this race that are not in the playoffs. And that's very possible to see. So, to run good all year, to rack up some wins, and then, end up in a situation where it all gets taken away from you at Talladega, you get caught up in the big one, or if you have a mechanical failure, at Kansas or at the Roval, you're out of this thing. And so, I understand that's what NASCAR, they're trying to create this excitement and the drama. And there is a lot of that for sure. But to have it all come down to a crash that takes out 28 cars completely out of your control, it's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, it's got to be super frustrating for the drivers. I mean, I would be pretty pissed off if I've ran solid all year long and then be able to be taken out of the playoffs, which didn't technically happen yet. But if that situation were to arise, I'd be hella pissed if I could not advance in the playoffs because of one stupid race. You know what I mean, Kevin?
But it always comes down to, these wrecks at Dega are always a push that went wrong. You really don't see guys just getting deliberately dumped. It's always, the accordion effect in this, 3-4 wide, someone gets turned into the outside line and then everyone just goes. It's just dominoes at that point. You're along for the ride. And that's exactly what happened to Austin Cindric. I mean, Cindric went with 5 to go. He was locked in, ready to move on to the round of 8 with that, the running position. Even if he didn't win the race, he still would not be 29 to the negative. And then immediately his day just ended. And that's how quickly things can happen at Dega. You can do everything right. He was up leading the race. We talked about it last week. You want to be in the top 2 rows with 10 to go. And that's exactly where Cindric was. And his day still ended.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he just got a little bit too ahead of the pack. He lost the momentum, the exertion of all the other cars. When you lose that, I think what happened is he pulled away a little too early, Kevin. He should have waited till 2 laps left to go before he totally mashed the gas. But unfortunately, once you get about 2 car lengths ahead of the entire pack, you start slowing down. So you're right. We had the accordion effect, and it was a very unfortunate situation. I guess the one thing to say about Austin Cindric is he started the race 29 points in the negative, and he ended 29 points in the negative as far as the playoff standings go, Kevin.
So he didn't technically worsen his position going to the Roval, but he had opportunities that were kind of taken away. And that's, unfortunately, that's Talladega racing. It's not just Talladega, it's super speedway racing. We talked about with Atlanta a few weeks ago, which obviously Joey ended up doing well in that scenario, but mile and a half, different layout, but still this pack racing is just so unpredictable. And a lot of it comes down to this next gen car. We've heard the drivers talk about they've just about thrown everything but the kitchen sink at these setups at Dega. Try a flap here, we'll tape this down, let's run something under the car, and that's all well and good. Keep the car on the ground. We didn't see any cars go like Ryan Preece did at Daytona last year, so progress to NASCAR on that for sure. But then you look at these cars that they step out of line. We saw the 8 of Kyle Busch go up high. We saw the 11 of Denny go up high. The second you get out of that line, you're done. And there's no way anyone's going to slow up 20 miles an hour to pick you up. And so these cars just have so much drag on them that if they are not consistently in the draft, your day's done.
You're toast. Absolutely. And that's why Suarez never had the chance, because he couldn't get back in the draft. So, it is what it is. Like, it was a fun race. I mean, don't get me wrong. I thought it was a pretty damn exciting race. It's just, I hate to see it end like it did, but I will give a shout out to William Byron. He does advance on points. So the first playoff driver to advance to the next round, folks. So we'll have to see, but like we're talking a minute ago, what if we see another driver that's not in the playoffs win next week at the Roval, Kevin?
And I think the chances are better of that happening than not. I mean, not to say a guy like Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, Ryan Blaney, Chase Elliott, is he going to be the road course ringer that we always know? Not to say those guys can't, but there's just so much good talent like an AJ Allmendinger, like Shane Van Gisbergen. And that's kind of what the Roval has created. All this road course racing gives opportunities for other drivers to win. So, is that a blessing and a curse in the sense that there's more guys that can get in on points now rather than, having that spot be locked in on a win? I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. But, you mentioned William Byron, 74 to the good. Christopher Bell, technically not locked in, but he's 57 to the good, Jeff. I mean, I feel like the second he takes the green flag, he's good. Kyle Larson, 52, and Denny Hamlin, 30 to the good. Denny ended up in a pretty good position. I mean, yeah, he finished P10 at Talladega, but compared to his last 6 finishes at Dega, he'll take that with the luck that the 11 had. Getting through Kansas, he was frustrated with that situation, barely made it into the round of 12. I think Denny is safely into the round of 8, unless for some reason he wrecks on lap 1.
Right, exactly. And at least he gained about 20 positions from Talladega. There were only 4 cars of playoff contenders that finished in the top 10. So yeah, a lot of playoff drivers just had a bad day, and it didn't necessarily affect the points a whole hell of a lot, as much as I think it was just frustrating to see the race come to a conclusion like that. So again, it is what it is. But yeah, for next week, there's guys that can win this race very easily. Like you said, AJ Allmendinger, he won it last year, and I think he's doing a damn good job in all the road courses he runs. That's why they call him Dinger the Ringer. But it'd be just kind of weird to see a round of playoffs without one single playoff driver winning a race, Kevin.
I think it's going to happen. I really do, unless William Byron can win this race, which he can. Willie B's good at this track. A lot of top 5s, points leader right now. Who's going to be that front runner going into the round of 8? That's what's been interesting about this playoff system. It's up and down every week. We kind of feel like we have a different front runner. I mean, coming out of Bristol with Kyle Larson's dominance, we immediately put him in Phoenix, which I feel like the 5 still is safely seated. I mean, I think he can get through the Roval cleanly, 2 mile and a half and a short track. I think the 5 easily gets into Phoenix unless something goes haywire. I mean, I'll go on record to say I think 2 of the Hendrick cars are definitely going to go to Phoenix. And I'd say the 24 and the 5 would be leading that.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. William Byron and Kyle Larson are just super solid. I think they'll definitely be in the round of 4. And old Mr. H, he's got to feel real happy, him, Jeff Gordon, and the whole crew out there at Hendrick, to have 4 of the 8 drivers still above the cutoff line. Their entire team is right now in the playoffs. And I'll tell you the one that has surprised me the most, and I mentioned it a little bit last week, Alex Bowman, Kevin. Alex Bowman has really just he's got the goods right now. It's like you want to get in that groove. This is the time of year to get in that groove, and Alex Bowman has done it. He is getting playoff points, getting those stage points. He's keeping himself up there in the top 10s and doing generally a damn good job. I mean, I know he finished P16 in Talladega, but I'm kind of throwing everybody's numbers out the window for this last race. But just as far as overall, consistency, Alex Bowen's kicking ass. And I don't know if he'll get to the Final Four, Kevin, but I wouldn't think he wouldn't make it.
Yeah, I mean, the way they're running right now, they're doing basically what Ryan Blaney has done in years past, and that's just consistency. Being in the top 10 in stage 1 and 2. You mentioned a 16th place finish, not terrible. Got minimal damage and all the chaos throughout the day, and was able to salvage enough points to put himself 26 to the good. I do feel like the 48 is probably safely into the round of 8. Doesn't have too much to worry about there, again, unless something happens on lap 1 or something wild. But yeah, Hendrick Motorsports, all 4 teams remain in the top 8. I mean, if for some reason the points were to remain the same as they are now going into Vegas, yeah, you'd have Logano out, Suarez out, you would have Cindric out and Briscoe out. And I really feel like those 4 guys are in a must win at the Roval. I mean, yeah, there's things that can happen between Chase Elliott and Logano, right? That's kind of the battle of the cutoff there. But that's a lot that Joey's going to have to overcome. I just feel like that's got to be a must win situation.
I think it is as well, Kevin. I mean, it's tough. Chase Elliott is a really good driver. It is kind of interesting to see him on the cutoff line with all 3 of his teammates ahead of him. I think he's kind of, thinking that one over himself. But yeah, Chase Elliott and Joey Logano right there. 13 points in the positive, 13 in the negative for Logano. And we'll have to see what happens next week.
Well, and that's, if you're Chase, you're going, I just have to be 13 better than Joey. And Joey's thinking the same thing. And finding 13 positions on the racetrack at a road course is doable. But I think both of these guys are experienced enough. I wouldn't consider them horrible contenders on a road course. I mean, I think they're both top 20 cars. So that's going to be an interesting battle. And then, of course, Suarez, Cindric, and Briscoe battling for a win. I mean, Cindric's had a lot of confidence. Those guys have been showing up with fast race cars, leading laps, qualifying extremely well. Cindric knows what he's going to have to do going into this. I don't really see him being, a front runner at the Roval, but, look, Ryan Blaney's won this thing years ago. Logano's won some road courses. There's a lot that could happen. I don't think there's any clear way we can say there's no way these guys have a chance, because look, everyone still does. I mean, Chase Briscoe, 32 points to the negative. Unlikely, right? Unlikely. But then I think back a couple of years ago when we had Jimmy Johnson, who was trying to make to the round of 8, ended up wrecking Martin Truex Jr. coming into that final corner, just trying to get that one last position, ended up taking himself out of the round of 8 and putting in Ryan Blaney. So anything can happen coming down to the buzzer.
Yeah, it can. You're right. Briscoe's in a much-win situation, but Penske's got to be pretty stoked in general too. Like you said, Joey Logano's just kicking ass, even though he's been consistent, but he's just right below that cutoff line. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of pulling for Joey here in the next this next race. But Austin Cindric, you're right. Yeah, he has been starting to be very consistent. Again, yeah, I think he's in a must-win situation, being 29 points to the negative. But I just don't see either one of the, as far as Chase Briscoe or Austin Cindric and Daniel Suarez. I think they're gonna get the cut. They're not gonna make it, Kevin. So it's gonna come down to Joey Logano and Chase Elliott to get there, unless something really funky happens up there with like Tyler Reddick or Blaney.
Yeah, I was looking at that because Reddick would be the next one out, 14 to the good. Any of those guys have a bad day, and this thing could quickly turn around. I mean, you could have the 45 out and the 22 in with a blink. I mean, same with the 99 to Suarez. So, I really think it's probably Reddick and Chase are probably the only 2 guys that aren't necessarily safe into this round of 8. I feel like Blaney 25 to the good, as long as he finishes 15th or better, I don't think he has anything to worry about, just kind of controlling his own destiny and moving on. But, NASCAR's got to get this DVP deal cleaned up. It's probably not going to happen to the off season, dragging guys back. We saw Blaney get hit with that at Watkins Glen a few weeks ago. We saw drivers get hit with it at Talladega. They're going to have to clean up the rule on that, and I know yesterday, like I mentioned, a 37-minute turnaround there of getting all that mess cleaned up in between turns 3 and 4 there. Just an absolute disaster of getting those cars pushed out of the grass, yanked out, getting it all cleaned up. That they were on such a time constraint that I think they were just yanking guys back to the garage. And because the rule states once you're there, you're done. There is no DVP. A lot of guys missed out on some opportunities to gain, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 points on the racetrack, but that's a lot.
Yeah, that's an awful lot, Kevin. So glad the race is over with. We'll see it again next year. As far as when we start in February with the Daytona 500, which is going to be a great race. It's always fun. I love it. That's where it should be. Talladega. I understand, like you're saying, it's a dollar thing. That place sells out. It packs it holds a lot of people. The people love going to Dega and having a good time and partying. But if we're going to have two races there, like I said, just pull one of them out, pull one out of the playoffs, put it back in regular season. If we're going to keep running it twice. So,
yeah, I don't disagree with that position at all. I mean, obviously, we've seen the 2025 NASCAR schedule for next year. We, of course, will be racing Dega twice, one of which is back in the playoffs. But, hopefully going into 26, we start to see some schedule changes, especially in the playoffs. We'd mentioned the Roval, hopefully going back to the Oval. This will be a telltale this weekend, I feel like. I don't know if attendance is so much going to dictate it, but as far as the product we see on the racetrack, past few years, when we first brought the Roval to market, of course, that was in the Gen 6 car, Jeff, very different than this next gen car. And NASCAR seemed to go a little bit road course heavy during that time. That's when we saw the addition of COTA, and some other places, obviously Mexico City next year, which we've talked about. I'm all fine with trying that out. But when we get down to the playoffs, it's a bummer for these guys to have great seasons and then get taken out at a place like Dega. And we all knew when we saw the schedule come out that was a possibility. And that's exactly the kind of, drama and chaos and chatter that NASCAR was trying to create. But man, like you mentioned, the amount of dollars that are racked up in wrecked race cars, and a lot of these are underfunded teams, can barely put sponsors on the car, just completely, destroyed at Dega. But then, blessing and a curse, the pros to it is if you come out of the other side of it, you get guys like Ricky Stenhouse Jr. that can, find themselves in victory lane.
And I really like, Brad Doherty, the co-owner of JD Doherty Racing. He's a good guy. We've met him a couple times out there in Phoenix for the championship. And he's got a great attitude, great personality. I love listening to him in the booth. So on the pro side, yeah, absolutely. It's good to see someone like them get some decent amount of funding out of getting this win. So it's just, again, hey, it's a product of its environment. It was a fun race, but frustrating for a lot of drivers. But, hey, it is what it is.
It's part of racing. They'll turn the page onto the Roval. And of course, the buzz and the silent elephant in the room, if you will, was this ongoing lawsuit that we have with NASCAR. Obviously, we saw Front Row Motorsports 23XI kind of team up and put out this lawsuit. And there's a lot of it's pretty tight lip. I was just listening to Denny Hamlin on Actions Detrimental. He can only say so much. I think we're only going to get snippets, bits and pieces, and it's kind of easy to speculate. So I'll try not to do that. But, it sounds to me, Jeff, after what we heard Richard Childress say, these guys were basically in a take it or leave it position with less than 6 hours to make a decision. They received the document on, what was it, September 6th, somewhere in that vicinity, around 6:37 p.m. And they were told, if you don't sign this by midnight, you lose your charters. So naturally, the majority of the garage all signed it because they would have been screwed without. But, Michael Jordan and these guys are saying this is an unfair deal. You're forcing people to give up rights, decision-making privileges, just a lot of things are being yoinked away from them. And in return, NASCAR is getting a bigger end of that revenue cut. Right. So there's the money piece that I'm understanding that's playing into it as well, where we're seeing resources and funds that typically trickle down to these teams are kind of getting rolled back up into more of a corporate position from NASCAR. So, Michael Jordan said he's pretty confident that it's going to be clean. It's not going to get too nasty. And I don't think we're going to know a lot of details on it, Jeff, but it's definitely a big thing that's shaking up the world of NASCAR right now. And I think it's going to be bigger than we think come the off season.
And a lot of these, large teams, a lot of these big owners, they were strong-armed. I mean, like you said, 6 hours to sign this. You have 400 plus employees, 400 to 500 employees between, Hendrick Motorsports has like 450. Richard Childress, like you're just mentioning, he has over 400 employees. Penske, these guys have huge staffs, so they didn't feel like they had much of a choice. They kind of had to do it. Some of these smaller teams, I think it's kind of more of a finger to the face of NASCAR saying, you know what, we are going to play hardball with you a little bit. I did read that Michael Jordan was mentioning he does want to make this as short as possible and just get through it. But yeah, we're not going to be seeing a lot of the details on it until later down the road, Kevin.
Well, that puts a little bit of a burden on, guys like Denny Hamlin and, some of these guys that have to show up at the track. And Denny's obviously competing for Joe Gibbs Racing in the 11 while being the team owner of the, team that is suing NASCAR. So it's just this really weird position that we don't typically see in professional sports that, I'm just curious to see how it plays out over these next few weeks. I don't necessarily think NASCAR is going to retaliate or do anything like that per se, but you're walking that tightrope of, here's the lawsuit going on. Here's me at the racetrack driving, trying to win a championship at the same time. I just can't think of any other sport and any other time where we've seen something like that.
And that's got to be really distracting for Denny Hamlin. He's got a lot of pressure on him right now. He's got a lot on his plate, Kevin. So, and it is tough because he did say, he wants to finish out his career at Joe Gibbs, which, I think he will. He may do some one-offs here and there for 23XI, and after he does fully retire. So, but these underfunded teams, it was kind of cool, I guess, for Ricky Stenhouse to actually win this race and get that money, because these teams, when they start losing sponsors, that's where their bread and butter mainly is these sponsors. And if people aren't helping these teams out with money, NASCAR is going to have to step up, or we're going to start seeing a lot of teams disappear. And we're just in the last few years starting to see these younger teams coming into the sport. And it's been a really big boost with some of these team owners, with Michael Jordan and like Pitbull and Justin Marks. I mean, these guys have brought new blood to the sport. They're bringing new fans to the sport. They're bringing some excitement. And for NASCAR to just kind of try to force them into a crappy deal is definitely not fair, Kevin.
Yeah, it is. And again, we're not going to know all of what's going on behind closed doors. And, there's two sides to every story, of course, but, I'm glad it's happening. I feel like somebody kind of had to be the voice of reason and stand up for some of these teams. And, I'm sure a lot of folks were afraid to do it just in fear of what it's going to cost. It's obviously not a cheap ordeal. And I did hear Denny Hamlin say this is going to fall 100% on the owners. So Michael Jordan, Denny, anyone who was involved in this lawsuit, they're going to take the financial brunt of whatever comes from it and not allow it to fall down on their employees, right? Because at the end of the day, they're trying to protect their teams. They're trying to protect everyone that they have in place that make these race shops go around. A lot of folks forget about the engineers and the guys at the shops and, the pit crew practice guys. There's a lot that goes into these teams, behind the scenes that makes the show run on Sunday. And so this is bringing a lot of light to that. And hopefully, everyone gets a fair deal out of it and kind of resets the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, and a little bit of positive news. Let's take a look at old Shane Van Gisbergen, old SVG, or as they call him down under, old Gizzy. I like calling him Gizzy instead of SVG. I like Gizzy. I really do. Here before when he got into that Chicago street race, they didn't really know what to call him, how to pronounce it almost. So it's just SVG, kind of like we have Kyle Busch, old KB, or BK for Brad Keselowski. Mm-hmm. But he actually had an incredible 199.4 mile hour lap on 197 this Sunday. He holds the record for the fastest lap in this next gen vehicle there, Kevin.
Which is pretty cool. SVG definitely got some more experience on the super speedways this weekend. Had a decent race going in the Xfinity series and got caught up in that mess at the end. But, SVG, he's starting to get it. The more ovals he's around, obviously the super speedway racing, which has to be very, very, kind of foreign to him, being that he's an Australian V8 supercar guy used to road courses and whatnot. Now he's trying to learn the draft pack, which a lot of these guys that are currently in the, Cup Series and have been for a long time are still trying to figure it out themselves. So, I almost think that gives him an advantage of coming in and trying to learn how to draft in this next gen car. Forget about what you once know, learn how to drive this car. That almost could be an advantage for some of these young guys and guys like SVG that are new to this style of racing.
Yeah, and another thing that's really cool with SVG is they just got a new sponsor for next year. WeatherTech will be serving as the primary sponsor for both him and Connor Zilisch in the Xfinity Series for 25. So there's a little bit of sponsorship money coming into the sport. We always like to see that, of course.
Well, I think that's a good move. I mean, SVG definitely is attractive to sponsors right now. He's kind of a new name in the sport, came in and shocked the world with the win at the Chicago Street Course last year. He's won 3 road courses this year, hanging on, going into the Roval, which he will probably, I think SVG moves on in the Xfinity round to the round of 8 in the Xfinity playoffs. SVG has to be the favorite going into this thing. And so, that's big for sponsors. That's big for him, to come into this sport as a full-time, competitor in the Xfinity series and have a shot to go into the round of 8. That's pretty exciting. And for him, he's banking on these road courses. He needs these to get him potentially in a championship contender in Phoenix.
Well, he could definitely get it done, Kevin. We do know that he is. If we were doing fantasy in the Xfinity series, he would be in my lineup. I would say that. Yes. He's a great personality, great guy. I love listening to him talk. He always is positive. You and I have talked about this before. He kind of reminds me a little bit of the personality that Marcos Ambrose had. it seems like he's always got a smile on his face. Even if he doesn't get the win, he comes home P5, whatever. He's just happy to be out there racing around. And I'd like to go hang out and have a couple beers with that guy.
Foster's.
Some
those folks, these folks drink the Foster's down there. Yeah, great guy. Love having him in the sport. And really cool to see him contending for an Xfinity, championship. He's in this playoffs and arguably the favorite going into this weekend on that side. And congrats to Sammy Smith for winning the Xfinity Series at Talladega this weekend. Didn't have a great race down at Kansas, came into Talladega almost in a must win points wise. And now he's in to the round of 8. So, good for JR Motorsports. Those guys just seem to have talent and always bring fast race cars to the track.
Kevin, they're solid. They are going to have a solid team next year. I think that, with their alliance with Hendrick Motorsports and the cars that they have and the caliber of drivers that has been picked up by Junior over the years. I think they're going to be mad fast next year. And they're obviously going to be the team to beat, in my opinion. But it was cool to see Sammy Smith get that win after the race. It was just cool to see everyone giving him congrats. Good crowd over there, man.
Yeah, I thought so, and I will say before we move on to the Roval here, the CW, I don't know if it was, I talked to my dad, who's also in the Denver metro area. We were having issues with the CW, not so much finding the channel, but the broadcast was cutting in and out. It was dropping sound. It was blurry at times. And I was bringing it in over the air antenna. So I thought, well, maybe my antenna's jacked to start playing with it. And then I was hearing other people were hearing that. So I don't know if that's just some growing pains for CW, not really being well seasoned in a live sports broadcast universe. But I think they're going to have some things to tighten up there, Jeff, in the off season.
Yeah, that happened out here as well. I didn't, I had it on, I got AT&T for my cable, and it's super fast internet cable, but there were some blackouts, some pauses, and, I'm sitting there listening. I'm like, I accidentally paused the race or something. And they just had some technical difficulties. So, maybe they need to get their shit together a little bit, but we'll see what happens with the old CW. Might take them a little bit of time. So
a lot of people aren't happy about it. So we'll see what happens when they go to the Roval this week, and obviously CW again, and then Cup over on the NBC side. So we got to look at this thing, Jeff. Who you got going into this weekend, fantasy wise? Where we're stacking up? I look back 2 years ago. Christopher Bell won this race 2 years ago. Obviously, playoff contender here. Good chance C-Bell runs well. We've mentioned A.J. Allmendinger. We know SVG is a no-brainer. I think a Michael McDowell is another good guy to slip in here. 34 has been fast on road courses. Is just racing for fun, basically, and for everything he can with his sponsors. Doesn't have a championship position on the line. I think 34 might be good to sneak in.
I thought he might have won the whole race, as far as getting the pole and leading laps. He led more laps than anybody else, led 42 laps. And not having to contend, the pit strategies and things like that are a little bit different at the super speedways because of the draft and pack racing. But he had a damn good chance to win it. But he is really good on those road courses, Kevin. You're absolutely right. I'd look at him in the Dinger. Of course, I always throw like Tyler Reddick or Ty Gibbs. They're both pretty damn good on road courses as well. So, hey, Alex Bowman did pretty good last year too. He came in P8, so maybe he's someone you can toss in.
Well, again, coming off a Chicago street course win, knows how to get around these tracks, fast race cars, 8th place finish last year. 48 is definitely a good one to keep on the radar. Chase Elliott, we're just waiting for him to be, become the road course guy that he once was in the old car. So another good guy from Hendrick to keep an eye on. And can't sleep on Kyle Busch. I think with a 3rd place finish there last year, his chances of winning are dwindling with 5 to go. He's hungry. He's fast. He almost, had a shot to win Kansas, was up there battling for the lead at Talladega. I think Kyle Busch is going to be hungry. Another guy to put in there.
Yeah, he is. I don't know if I put him in there or not. I've got kind of certain drivers I've got for certain races. You got a few races left. Well, a few drivers left for more races that we've got. So, I'm having to watch a couple on the playoff picks, Kevin.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to blow through all your fantasy picks with, still Vegas, Homestead, Martinsville, and Phoenix to go. You want to save some guys for those picks as well. But, the Roval is just kind of a bit of a wild card. I wouldn't say as much as Dega, of course. We kind of know that there's going to be guys fast. The race, it's a long race. Heartburn turn 1 there, overshooting that on restarts. We've seen that almost every single year. So it's really going to come down to not making mistakes. We've seen some of the best, Brad Keselowski, Chase Elliott, overshoot that corner. A little bit of reconfiguration on turn 6 and 7. So this is going to be a little bit of a different Roval than we've seen seen years past, and coming to the start finish line, that sharper turn there that we've seen a lot of guys get wrecked and overshoot, under brake, just a lot can go wrong here. So it's going to take a perfect race, no mistakes, a lot of pressure on guys like Joey, so I think it's going to make for a good one. Jeff, what do you think?
Oh, it really is. And you nailed it right there. It's going to be about not making mistakes. As long as you can run a solid race, you've got a damn good chance of winning. Just don't get caught up in anything, and just don't overshoot any of those turns, Kevin. Real quick though, before we move on, turn the page, I do want to throw a huge shout out to Greg Biffle. Greg Biffle's been flying his helicopter about 30 to 40 different trips back and forth all across South Carolina and North Carolina, helping dropping off supplies, picking up people that are stranded. Again, NASCAR community goes out of their way to do it. And Greg Biffle is really kicking ass, Kevin.
Yeah, awesome that those guys are, chipping in, helping where they can. Biffle with his helicopter, NASCAR doing what they can out of the Charlotte area. I'm sure we'll see a lot, being that they're going to be in the Roval this weekend. Those guys are still cleaning up. Our thoughts are with them. And of course, as we record this on Monday evening here, Hurricane Milton has just been upgraded to a Category 5. It's headed right for Tampa and our friends down in the Orlando, Daytona area. So, hopefully we're hoping for the best there, Jeff, but it's not looking good.
No, it's not. And Eddie DeHaan threw a tweet out. He was pretty pissed off because he saw that we're throwing another $176,000 or $176 million to Palestine, but yet FEMA can't help out our, people here in the United States that need this money and these funds. So on that note, Kevin, we can turn the page now and head on out to Charlotte.
On down to the capital for NASCAR in the Charlotte area. Great weekend coming up. Next week, we do have our friend Sky joining us. She's going to be at the Roval, and will be joining us next Monday night to recap all of the fun as we cut it down to 8 and get ready for Vegas. So I think there's going to be a lot of storylines coming this week. Hopefully everyone hangs on tight, get through these crazy hurricane and weather systems, and we can finish out this race, and the rest of the season strong, Jeff.
That's right, Kevin. And what do we do until then?
We're on to the Roval. 4 are out, 8 are in. Mash the gas.
Mash the gas.